who may need to put in one poster in a short while. But first, let's take a look at what is in the dailies. On the front page of the Daily Nation is this: climate, the grim reality. Africa Climate Summit. And from rising temperatures to extreme weather events, our Earth is no longer safe, and even more so for the inhabitants of the global South. I'll ask our panelists to explain this debate around the global North and the global South, what is all that about? Will the African and world leaders converging in Nairobi this week find solutions for these and other emerging crises? So there we go. Front page, the president yesterday drove himself in an e-vehicle, electric vehicle. President William Ruto alights from an electric car he drove from State House to the KICC in Nairobi's CBD to attend yesterday's closing ceremony of the Youth Africa Climate Change Summit. The Africa Climate Summit starts today. Also on the front page here of the Daily Nation, Raila exit. Who's next in line? Why the opposition chief may be on his way out. Actually, that is the headline on this morning's Taifa Leo. And Mark Masai would be furious with me if I didn't read this one. Arsenal gets the better of Man United in 4-goal thriller. And highlighted also on the front page of the Daily Nation this morning is Ali Kach, young anti-plastic pollution champion to address summit. And this is a 10-year-old Nigel Waweru, who was appointed by the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry as its young ambassador in May to address summit that will be attended by heads of state, including host President William Ruto. I listened to yesterday's conversation. I believe we'll have around 34, if I heard correctly, heads of state in the country for this summit. Funding foreign banks fuel climate crisis in Africa. A new report details how banks outside the continent are funding projects that are oiling the wheels of the climate crisis. Pun intended, I imagine. No show, Pakistan PM cancels planned visit to Kenya. Acting Pakistani Prime Minister cancelled his 3-day visit to Kenya 5 days after confirming he would attend the African Climate Change Summit. More on that on page 7. Perhaps we can figure out what's that about. Changing times, evolution of the climate crisis and why you should be concerned. Kenya's State of the Climate Report paints a bleak future for agriculture in the face of climate change. And there's also some conversation yesterday about agriculture being where the next billionaires will be minted, and that the continent has a lot of potential where that is concerned. All right, I did already mention Taifa Leo, so let's just cross over there. And this is the headline: Mrithi wa Raila successor, Raila Odinga's successor. Several faces here: Gladys Wanga, governor wa Homa Bay, Opiyo Wandayi, kiongozi wa wachache katika bunge. Winnie Odinga, binti wa Raila, Babu Wino, mbunge Embakasi. What have they written there? I want to be, what's the word? Embakasi Mash. Okay. Mashariki, I assume. Governor Ochilo Ayako, Governor Nyang'nyong'o, Governor James Orengo, Raphael Tuju, mbunge wa zamani. Miongoni mwa wanaopigiwa debe kuchukua usukani wa Luo Nyanza kisiasa ni Babu Owino, Gladys Wanga na Opiyo Wandayi. So that is what the front page looks like. Taifa Leo. Business Daily. Let's get down to the business. How KeNHA Kura inflated prices for 26 road projects. And this particular report is penned by Dominic Omondi. Kenya's road agencies, including the Kenya National Highways Authority, are on the spot for supervising cost overruns for at least 26 road projects and overshooting their budgets by more than 20 billion shillings, leading to a spike in pending bills. An analysis of official data from the Transport Ministry by the Business Daily has revealed that between 2007 and 2017, at least 26 infrastructure projects had cost overruns. Though the law allows for some price variations, the fact that a significant number of projects overshot their budgets raises the questions on the quality of budgeting that has seen them fail the requirement that projects should be completed within time, budget and scope. These cost overruns have culminated into a buildup of pending bills, currently estimated at 145 billion shillings for the road projects alone. This is a quarter of the government's total pending bills. Okay, and so for more on that, page 2 of the Business Daily. Remember, on your device, epaper.nation.africa. And here we have global banks are fueling Africa climate crisis. This report is by Helen Shikanda. As delegates from different African countries converge on Nairobi from today for the inaugural Africa Climate Summit, a new report has shown how banks outside the continent finance projects that fuel the climate crisis. The report, How the Finance Flows, the Banks Fueling the Climate Crisis, shows that every year, 11 banks from Europe, the Americas, and Asia pump in money to finance such projects 20 times more than they do for climate solutions on the continent. And that report published by Action Aid. On the ticker here, how state-backed chronic illnesses fund will ease pain for diabetes and cancer patients. The state will set up a special fund for the treatment of chronic illnesses in a bid to save patients from out-of-pocket payments when they deplete their medical cover and ease pressure on the National Health Insurance Scheme. KeNHA Part Pay 6 million shillings for fire losses, and KRA loses 1.3 billion shillings tax claim against Bidco Oil. Before I move on from the publications, Nyumba Kubwa, there is a report that has been filed by Leon Lidigu, which if I don't mention, will earn me his ire. Here it is. The air we breathe is slowly killing us. Study reveals that pollution levels in Nairobi, Kampala, and Addis Ababa were alarming. Okay, the Standard. And this is it, Africa's big gamble. Today, presidents and heads of government are supposed to come up with climate change resolutions that, among other things, will ensure the continent gets compensation for the crisis. However, this is not the first time leaders are pushing for financing deal. Will the talks yield results is the question. Same question we had on our poster. And $1.6 trillion US dollars. Africa needs between, 2022, they tell us, and 2030. This is what the amount Africa needs between 2022 and 2030 to achieve its nationally determined contributions. A quote here of President William Ruto: "We have an opportunity to lead the world and show that we can industrialize and prosper and achieve this in a sustainable manner. Expected outputs: Africa leaders Nairobi Declaration on a Green Growth and Climate Finance Agenda and Solutions for Africa and the World, pathway to a new global financial deal that includes at-scale and fit-for-purpose financing instruments to serve specific growth goals, investment commitments, including showcasing multi-billion-dollar worth of green investment deals on the continent, announcements on tangible progress on ongoing major continent-wide global initiatives and new partnerships, roadmap for implementation of key declarations." Okay. Raila mocks Ruto climate change talks. That on page 7 of the Standard. Western governors in trouble over president's tour. Muranga seals soar in league debut, and Bongo's reign continues after coup. So I'll be discussing that actually tomorrow. Okay, the Star. Housing tax NHIF law could make or break Ruto's rule. And that is the headline story on the Star. Amid outcry over housing levy, government set to introduce 2.75% pay for NHIF. We had that on the Business Daily on Friday. Nairobi warms up to Africa climate delegates. They're riding bikes in the interest of being climate responsive. Motorists ride electric bikes under a green transport scheme to reduce carbon emissions and pollution. Yesterday, KeNHA is hosting the Africa Climate Summit from September the 4th to the 6th at the Kenyatta International Convention Center in Nairobi. Let us see image here. COP28, KeNHA likely to become Africa's spokesperson. And this is Adnan Amin, a Kenyan, is a development economist. He has more than 25 years of experience in international environment, sustainable development, and energy policy. Adnan has held senior positions in the UN and was the founding DG of the International Renewable Energy Agency between 2011 and 2019. Disputed Mukuru land belongs to Orbit Chemicals, and Abebe Haile Gabriel has spent something on climate, transform agri-food systems. All right. Okay, let's wrap it up. I imagine the only daily left out is People Daily. Here we go. Talks to save broke versities. Mashogu says public universities owe 62 billion shillings to state agencies such as KeNHA and NHIF. A team has been formed to advise on whether these debts can be written off. Should this be done, the institutions will have to pay off other obligations, such as money owed to suppliers. Arsenal fire 3 goals past Man United in thrilling tie. MPs on mission to revive struggling sugar millers. And further down here, food security top agenda at climate talks. First ever Africa Climate Summit kicks off in Nairobi today, and on the table is the question of how the continent can combat drought, which has reduced African countries' capacity to feed their citizens. Champions of climate action, a section of youth delegates joined President William Ruto at the KICC a day after the official opening of the week-long Africa Climate Summit 2023. Delegates from across the globe, are attending the event that is supposed to guide African policy interventions against the effects of global warming. The first ever Africa Climate Summit kicks off in Nairobi today. Mohammed, about time?
This is the moment, 60 years after our independence and 33 years of international climate negotiations. Africans are convening so that they can rally the continent behind an alternative climate vision. And so it's about time this continent rose and actually provided not just leadership in the continent, but actually for humanity.
Okay, alternative to what?
If you look at the way the climate talks have been organized over these last 33 years, they've largely been dominated by the historic polluters. The continent of Africa is home to 17% of the global population and accounts for less than 4% of the emissions. But we're on the front line. We're suffering fast and worst the impact of climate change. But hardly have we had our issues raised in the climate process in a way that they can actually be tackled. So 54 countries of the world, that is effectively a quarter of the UN member states. So if we have a process that arrives at decisions in a democratic way, you know, the priorities of Africa will have been advanced and addressed. But we've never had an opportunity, heads of state in the continent of Africa and African leadership convening so that they can actually set a shared vision for climate at the highest level. We've had the African climate negotiators, we have had the African environment ministers working actively to help develop an Africa common position. But this time, it feels like the whole continent is actually rallying behind the cause. And I hope this turns the page in a way that we can actually drive climate solutions for Africans and by Africans.
All right. So, Dr. Osano, this is how the Standard puts it. They tell us that this is Africa's big gamble. Do you agree?
No, not necessarily.
Why not?
I mean, it's not a gamble. You know, the climate situation is a reality. Most of you that follow news, you know that this month of July, on average, was the hottest month ever recorded in the last 50 years. So for Africa to step forward and take leadership, particularly around defining the continent's agenda by African leaders, is not a gamble. I haven't read the story, but I think I disagree completely.
Not a gamble. All right. And we also have in studio, do you mind if I do Wangari and come to you? Because you're the economist in the room. I have a specific question for you. Your thoughts on, is it about time that Africa came together to, you know, chart a common course ahead of COP28?
Olive, thank you so much for that question. I think it's important that it's Africa who's leading the conversation around climate. We have the youngest population. We have the most arable land in the world. But in addition to that, we have, more importantly, we have the most and best renewable energy sources in the world. So this is time for us to shape what the conversation around climate looks like. As you've said in the news, in headlines today, it's $1 trillion conversation. How can that investment come into Africa to help us develop sustainably? So absolutely, it's really our time to take over this conversation and lead it from the front.
All right. As the economist, Fadel, what do you make of the agenda, climate finance?
Climate finance is the biggest and most important question in the climate change space, because how are we going to pay for it? This transition from the old system that was unjust, a system that today excludes 600 million Africans from having access to electricity, close to 1 billion Africans exposed to harmful toxic fumes from not having access to clean cooking resources. So the new system that we want to put in place must deliver not just important clean cooking technology, but African-made clean cooking technology, and deploy clean energy infrastructure, not imported, but produced here, because we do have all the strategic minerals that are needed for the high-tech revolution, that are needed for the clean energy revolution. So when we talk about climate action, we're talking about development, and this is our opportunity. What we need is a coherent, comprehensive vision, which we hope our leaders will deliver in the next few days, about how we organize to leverage all the resources and capabilities in complementary ways as a continent to deliver this transformative vision that happens to be consistent with climate action, because this is development and transformation, and it just happens to require leapfrogging into a renewable energy era as opposed to the fossil fuel era of the past that didn't deliver for Africa, and leapfrogging and restoring food sovereignty and agroecology. Today we import 85% of our food on this continent, the most fertile soil on the planet. And it's not by accident. Yes, droughts contribute a little bit, but there's something that happened as soon as we became independent nations in terms of international trade agreements that put us in a position to become dependent on food imports from the rest of the world. And that needs to be addressed, that needs to be repaired.
Okay. So what I've been hearing, and I'm no expert, is that the conversation needs to move beyond what, like, has there been a dispute of some sort between the global north and the global south? Maybe tell us what is this global north and what is this global south, Mohammed, for those who may not be aware.
So in geography terms, it's basically the north of the hemisphere and the south of the hemisphere. But in climate terms, what we're talking about is the historic polluter who have actually contributed the bulk of the emissions that have caused climate change. The folks that are actually living in the industrialized countries are about 20% of the global population. And between them, they account for 3/4 of the historic emissions that have caused climate change. The rest of us, 80% of the global population that is in the global south, have only emitted about 20% of the historic emissions. I'm looking here at historic emissions because what causes climate change is the cumulative emissions over time. So when you look at climate responsibility, the West owes the rest of us a climate debt. So you hear about climate finance, and it appears that we're begging for charity with a ball in hand, where in fact we're claiming reparations and climate debt for that matter. When you hear our economists talk about how our countries are in a debt distress, the only factor, the loans we've taken from these countries, what they don't also account for is actually these countries who we're indebted to have caused the climate crisis that the rest of us are suffering. And so the folks who we're indebted to are the historic polluters. And so the amount of money that they provide in climate finance is pittance. In 2009 in Copenhagen, they committed to provide between them 100 billion to support the rest of the world, i.e. the developing countries. And of that money, about 80% of it has been realized. And most of it, 80% in fact, is actually in the form of loans. So you're basically loaning countries to contribute to solve a problem that they didn't cause in the first place. And you're basically asking them to indebt the economy in the name of solving a climate crisis that you've caused. And so the cruel injustice about climate change is those of us in the global south, in this case the continent of Africa, who have imprinted the lightest carbon footprint on the planet and who live in harmony with nature, are the ones who are falling fast to the impact. And so unless we address this inherent injustice within the climate crisis, there is no way we'll be able to tackle climate change. And so I hope when our leaders convene in the KeNHA International Conference Center, the message they send to the rest is that we didn't cause the problem, we're the least responsible, and we're the ones who are most affected, but we want to step up and provide leadership. We want to develop in a clean manner. We don't want to follow in your footsteps. We will leapfrog that energy and become a green leader. But for us to do that, you have to pay your climate debt. You have to share the clean technology. If you remember the experience with the COVID pandemic, we had to basically pay for the vaccines. But this case, we're going to be asked to pay for clean technology, the IPRs for those technology, but the reason we're buying this technology in the first place is to contribute to solve a problem that was caused by the very people who are asking us to pay a premium price for their technology. So this is injustice that is in the climate crisis.
All right. Wangari, I see you nodding. You
Yes.
agree?
I definitely agree. I think it's important for us to really realize that Africans can lead the technology and that we can lead the solutions for climate action. I'll give you an example. Look at Safaricom and what we've done with M-Pesa. Just the banking system that is so well integrated into our society today is something that we Africans innovated around. So if we are now looking at how we can apply this innovative nature to the climate action and to the climate crisis, I think it's important that we really start to look at those solutions. But then that also takes us coming together, the Global North, the Global South, South-South cooperation as well, because we can learn also from Brazil and from other countries that have done amazing things in the different realms of climate action. So it is important, I think, that we take the lead on this. We innovate around it. One of the things I'd like to also mention is a lot of the solutions that are now coming in as sustainable are things we did as Africans inherently. Before, how we used to construct our buildings, there's a reason why we used to use mud. It kept the building cool inside. So now we're struggling with air conditioning and using a lot of energy. There's over 2 billion ACs in the world right now because we're building buildings now with glass facades that enable heating into the buildings. How do we now come back to some of those ways that we used to build, innovate around that, and use those to be the climate action and share that with the rest of the world instead of it being packaged back to us and it was our solution in the first place?
So if you're wondering how she knows so much about air conditioning and all of that, Wangari is also the board member, KeNHA Green Building Society. So we need to take a break, but we will come back with Dr. Fadel, Dr. Osano on this question of does the conversation need to change? Because COP